Welcome everyone to the launch of SBP's standards development process. We are going to get started now. Welcome again. I hope you're all keeping safe in these challenging and strange times. My name is Carsten Hulius. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of SBP and I'll be guiding you through the program today. It's really great to see so many participants joining us today, and I'm pleased that we have a good cross-section of our key stakeholders represented. Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee control panel, and you should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. Now, when joining this webinar, you're listening in using your computer's audio system and speakers by default. If your computer audio doesn't work well for you and you would prefer to join over the phone, go to the audio pane and select telephone, and the dial-in information should be displayed. Our presentation will last for around 25 minutes, after which we will open up the session for questions. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to the presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. Important to note is that you may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll do our best to address them during the Q&A session directly after the presentation. We're scheduled to finish the event in 1 hour. Now, should your questions not get answered in that time, we will contact you by email afterwards. Thank you, and I should now like to hand over to Simon Armstrong, SBP's Chief Technical Officer.
Thanks very much indeed, Carsten, and I look forward to answering some of those questions a little later on. What I'd like to do now is to spend some time thinking about the standards development process that we're launching today, and to consider why we're doing it, what it will encompass, who's going to do it, and how you can get involved. The standards development process involves the review and, where necessary, the revision of the requirements. Let's focus now on why we're reviewing and revising the standards now and what that entails. All 6 of our standards will be within the scope of the review, from standards 1 and 2, which cover the definition of sustainability of feedstock and how that sustainability is determined, through to standards 4 and 5, covering the chain of custody integrity and the collection of communication of data along that supply chain, Standard 6, which covers requirements on our end users, and Standard 3, which sets out how certification bodies certify against those standards. Since the standards were launched in 2015, we've also published a suite of other accompanying documents, such as instruction documents, interpretations, and guidance. We'd like to take this opportunity to incorporate all of those into the standards, making them more accessible and easier to use. The existing requirements are being widely implemented across the biomass industry, and they're providing a credible guarantee across the supply chain to end users and to stakeholders. In 2019, just under 12 million tonnes of biomass were traded with SBP claims. That represents about 2/3 of the EU 28 market share for industrial pellets. At the end of 2019, we had 210 certificate holders, and that figure sits just over 270 at the moment. As demand for SBP certificates and for biomass with SBP claims continues to grow, we need to be sure that our standards are fit for the future and are able to deliver on our purpose of enabling climate goals to be met. Over the last 5 years, SBP has needed to develop and evolve in response to changes in definitions of biomass sustainability and to market demand. We need to maintain our responsiveness, but we also need to ensure that good biomass continues to be available to those markets where this is enabling climate goals to be met. New markets for good biomass are emerging, and we need to respond to this. New markets also imply new challenges and new sourcing areas, and the standards will need to take this into consideration. We operate in an interconnected and changing landscape of other schemes and initiatives and emerging sustainability priorities. We need to respond to this changing landscape and develop in line with best practice on topics such as forest carbon and biodiversity. We have always encouraged feedback from our stakeholders, and they have been providing input on what they'd like to see changed and improved. Whilst we have tried to respond where we can, we now have an excellent opportunity to incorporate those suggestions more fundamentally. International best practice too tells us that requirements should be revised and updated periodically. There are lots of good reasons for us to review the requirements now, whether it be advances in best practice or scientific understanding, lessons learnt from implementation, and the opportunity to make the requirements more accessible and easier to understand. We need to make sure the standards are fit for purpose for the future. Our multi-stakeholder governance has now been in place for over a year, and so we're well placed to undertake this process now, ensuring a balanced multi-stakeholder approach. Let's focus now on the process that we'll be following. We have prepared a number of documents to support the process and provide background material. These are available from the Standards Development section of the SBP website. A public summary document provides an overview of the process, and more detail can be found in the Terms of Reference document. We have collated stakeholder feedback that we have received to date, together with the results of an external gap analysis that we commissioned and a review of relevant schemes and initiatives. The SBP document development procedure sets out the requirements for the process and informs all of our work. The process is guided by key principles including engagement and transparency. We want this process to improve what we do. The public summary document sets out an overview of the process and also how to get involved. Some stakeholders have already begun to provide their inputs, but we want to make sure that we also give voice to stakeholders that might not normally engage with us. We're providing a number of routes to enable you to be heard, and there'll be more details on these later. In summary, the standards will be reviewed and revised by working groups. Revisions will be passed to the Technical Committee prior to approval by the Standards Committee. In practice, the process is much more complex and will take account of other inputs such as stakeholder comments, the results of pilots, public consultation, and consideration of other schemes. Whilst we can't be sure how long the process will take, and we need to take account of the uncertainties resulting from coronavirus, we estimate that the process for Standards 1 and 2, the sustainability standards, may run to the end of 2021. For Standards 3 to 6, covering chain of custody, data collection and communication and accreditation requirements, the process may be a little quicker, with publication towards the end of 2021. More details can be found in the Terms of Reference document, including a process flowchart. We're currently at the stage of establishing the working groups that will develop the new requirements, and we'll form 3 working groups. Working Group A will cover Standards 1 and 2, the sustainability standards. Working Group B will cover Standards 3 and 4, the chain of custody and accreditation requirements, and Working Group C will cover Standards 5 and 6, the data collection and communication requirements, and the requirements on end users. We're encouraging stakeholders to register their interest in joining those working groups, and you'll be able to do so at the end of today's presentation. Once each working group has been formed, it will begin to develop a new revision draft of the standards. This is likely to take multiple meetings. Once the working group is content with that first revision draft, it will be submitted to the Technical Committee and the Standard Committee for their review and comments. Revision Draft 1 will then be subject to public consultation. For Standards 1 and 2, this will last for 60 days, and for Standards 3 to 6, the consultation period will be 30 days. SBP will provide webinars to inform those consultations. Revision drafts of Standards 1 and 2 will be pilot tested across a range of conditions. The results of the public consultations and also the pilot studies will be collated. Once the wording is agreed by the working groups, the second draft will be reviewed by the technical committee and a second round of public consultation conducted if necessary. That final draft will be submitted to the Standards Committee for approval, and if satisfied, the Standards Committee will approve that final draft for publication. As a part of the process, a transition period will be agreed for each standard, and this will be the period from the date of publication to when the requirements must be implemented. And this will enable certificate holders and certification bodies time to prepare to implement the requirements. We want to make sure that anyone who would like to has the opportunity to comment and contribute both to the standards and to SBP more widely. There are lots of ways for you to be kept informed and to get involved, and we'd be happy to hear from you in whichever way suits you best. In addition to joining one of the working groups and our stakeholder advisory group, we would welcome topic-specific or one-on-one engagement, where you'd like to share your views but perhaps don't have the time to commit to a more formal engagement. You can also take part in our future webinars, our public consultations, or just send us an email. We'll be providing updates through bulletins that you can sign up to receive, and also making information available through the website. Now that we've covered an outline of the process, I'd like to say a little more about the groups and the people that will be involved. Our multi-stakeholder governance structure has been established for over a year now. The Standards Committee is responsible for approving the new standards and is made up of a 50-50 mix with representatives from industry and civil society. Our Technical Committee comprises 6 experts in certification and standards, and their critical review of draft documents will be considered by the Standards Committee as part of the approvals process. The Stakeholder Advisory Group provides a portal for interested stakeholders to inform what we do and is open to interested parties. The Secretariat will manage the process and ensure that we keep to the defined processes and procedures. Within the Secretariat, we have developed some specific resources to support the process. Annie Adams will be helping to manage technical aspects of what we do, and Owen Davies has been taken on to help with editing new documents. I'm very pleased to be able to announce that Jenny Walther-Thoss will be joining the team on a full-time basis to support the work on standard developments and also with other projects. We've also engaged 3 external chairs for the working groups. Julian Blondeau is an assistant professor at the Free University in Brussels with research interests in clean heat and power production. Julian will be chairing Working Group C, covering Standards 5 and 6 relating to data collection and communication and to the requirements on end users. Alistair McGregor will chair Working Group B, covering Standards 3 and 4, Chain of Custody and Accreditation. Alistair has a long history of working with these requirements across a number of schemes. Working Group A is being chaired by Adam Harrison, who worked for WWF for over 15 years. Since retiring from WWF, Adam has been working on a number of projects, and we are delighted that he'll be bringing his experience and expertise to the process. I hope that was a helpful introduction to the scope and process. There's much more information available on our website, and if you'd like to know more, then please do ask a question during this session or send a follow-up email. I'm now going to hand over to Adam Harrison, who will tell you more about the work around Standards 1 and 2.
Hello, I'm Adam Harrison and I'm chairing Working Group A. I'm going to briefly introduce the scope of Working Group A and talk about how and when we're going to deliver the work. The Working Group's job is to look at the scope of Standards 1 and 2. Standard 1 defines what is legal and sustainable woody biomass for use of energy and how biomass producers can use the supply-based evaluation to assess that, while Standard 2 defines how they can verify that the feedstock meets Standard 1. Standards 1 and 2 working together form the core of the overall SBP standard, and the job of the working group is really to see whether they're fit for purpose to meet the overall aims of SBP itself. Those are to facilitate the economically, environmentally and socially responsible use of biomass, enabling climate goals to be met. That means everything is on the table, everything is up for discussion and possibly for review. So we can make recommendations not just about Standards 1 and 2, but about the rest of the standards, but actually also about how the wider SBP functions. The standards were first developed in 2015, and we hope to build on the first 5 years of experience as well as our understanding of how things are changing in the real world. To help that, the SBP has undertaken a number of desk studies, which you will find in the documentation that's supporting this process. One of these has been a review of the users of the certification system, whether it's biomass producers or certification bodies, to learn the experiences they've had over the first 5 years. The SBP have also reviewed other certification systems to try and learn from them how they address some of the issues. And we've also undertaken a review of the regulatory regimes in a number of countries importing and using woody biomass for energy. The working group will be looking at the standard through the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, both so that we can identify the sorts of issues like biodiversity and carbon storage in the forests that are important for sustainability, but also to better understand how certification can help deliver some of those outcomes, whether it's poverty alleviation or greater equality. One of the first tasks of the working group is going to be to complete this review and look at this issue in more detail. Our work to date has already identified a large number of issues that the working group is going to tackle. Under climate, we'll be looking at the greenhouse gas balance of the use of biomass for energy, but also considering things like carbon storage in the forest and land use change and its implications for climate change. Under biodiversity, we'll be reviewing the approach using the HCV concept, but I'm also interested in trying to think about biodiversity and conservation at the landscape scale, and trying to move from just protection of wildlife through to restoration of habitats. This review of the standards will also look at tightening up controls over soil, water and air, but also social safeguards like free, prior, informed consent, but the role of certification in driving things like decent living wage, poverty alleviation, food security and greater equity. One area which I think we should focus on is how SBP co-recognises other standards and whether they are really delivering against our own principles and criteria. We'll explore assurance and how it can be delivered, in particular looking at this issue of trying to move from process measures to outcomes of certification, thinking about the precautionary approach and also the risk-based approach which the SBP standard takes. I'm very interested in exploring impacts and thinking about how we can better monitor and evaluate them, but also thinking about the roles of new technologies, whether it's mobiles or remote sensing, in delivering that. The role of the standard in building capacity of users to better deliver sustainability is important, and I think we should be exploring the possible question of collusion and the separation of certification bodies from the biomass producer which they're certifying. But of course the working group itself should be developing a range of issues, but it's worth exploring. I'd like to move on now to think about how we might undertake this work. We're aiming for the working group to be made up of a balance of stakeholders representing the users of certification, whether it's biomass producers or certification bodies, as well as a range of technical experts and other stakeholder interests. SBP isn't a membership organisation, so this working group is open to anybody who wants to contribute. We are asking the contributors to represent their peers and their fellow interests in the process, so we would like you to engage with them and try and bring a range of perspectives into this process. The working group itself will be making decisions by consensus, but we appreciate that some stakeholders may not want to contribute to the final decisions, and therefore we're open to having observers as well as participants in decision making. Much of the information that's going to be raised at these working groups may well be confidential, and we need to treat that sensitively. The working group will be made up of a chair, that's me. We will be able to appoint a vice chair if needed, if I'm not available at any point in any of the discussions. We will have the participants in the working group as well as potentially observers. The Sustainable Biomass Programme Secretariat will be there, as well as an editor who will actually be doing the drafting of the revised standard. If we need facilitators, we'll be able to use them in some of the discussions. And as I said earlier, we'll have a range of external experts who can bring in their perspectives to the process. This work presents us with a number of challenges. COVID-19 is going to restrict how and when we're going to be able to meet. The working group is going to be made up of a whole range of stakeholders, many of whom don't know each other, so we're going to have to be able to build trust and relationships between us. We have a lot of work to do within the working group and not much time to achieve it, and everyone is very busy. We're spread across the world, which is also going to make it difficult to find times to meet, and we're going to have to be able to function in a way which allows communications and coordination between the other working groups looking at the standard as well as the other committees within SBP. So we're thinking about what sort of approaches we should take to try and address some of these challenges. We propose that we should meet frequently, but for quite short online meetings to start with, maybe two-hour sessions spread over a week in each month to start with. The process is going to be managed through Microsoft Teams software. We hopefully are going to break up the group into subgroups to address particular issues to give people greater time to focus, and we're definitely going to be asking participants in the working groups to undertake some work between meetings. The Secretariat is going to be able to support this work, but it is going to demand input from all of us. The materials for the working group will be online so that the rest of the SPP can see it. I'll be able to communicate progress through a chair's blog, and we hope to be able to meet as soon as we can physically sometime in the autumn, probably in Europe or in North America. Finally, I'd like to look at when we were expecting to undertake some of this work. As you can see from this flowchart, SBP has already been working with a range of stakeholders to try and set up this working group. We've had informal discussions with a number of you and certainly sent out a large number of emails asking for participants. We're hoping by halfway through the year, in June, July, to actually set up the working group and start the work of revising the standards over the following 7 months through to the end of January next year, 2021, at which point there's going to be a 60-day public consultation on the revised standard, and in parallel with that, a piloting of the standard by the SBP Secretariat to see if it's practical. After that public consultation and piloting, we'll take the lessons learned from those two processes over the following months to come up with a final draft, which may or may not need further public consultation, and that will then be submitted towards the end of 2021 to the SBP for approval. This final slide sets out a number of major stages in the process, which I think it might be good to illustrate. The first meeting in July, we'll have to make introductions between ourselves, get to know each other, but also understand how we're going to work, agree the terms of reference and the scope for the work. We'll then move on to learning from the other experiences, both a review of the documentation, but an understanding of the perspectives brought to the working group itself. We'll use that understanding to build the framework for the standard, and then populate the detail of it, resulting in the first draft, which will then move on to the testing, both through the public consultation and the piloting. The next step will then be to review the results of that testing and piloting, develop a final standard and submit that to the SBP along with a number of recommendations. Of course, all of this is up for discussion in the first meeting of the working group, and none of this is yet set in stone. Thank you. I'll now like to hand back to Carsten for a question and answer session.
Thank you for your attention. I should like to echo the call to action for our stakeholders to get involved in this important piece of work and help shape the future of SBP. We've covered the various routes for doing so, and you can find more information on our website. If you have any further questions, contact us via the email address given on the screen or go to our website. We look forward to hearing from you. Keep safe and all the best.